welcome and very good evening to one and all. Now no more darkness, let's move towards light. Light, more light, light of knowledge, light of wisdom, light of success. Let us start with light the lamp of wisdom and pray to Almighty for the success of everything. May I now request all our distinguished guests, today's eminent speakers and other dignitaries, please proceed for light the lamp and pray to Almighty for success of everything. Please. Madam.
Technocrats TIT Group of Institutions, the largest educational group of Central India, awarded for excellence in education and highest placements, delivering quality education with world-class infrastructure, highly qualified faculties, high-tech labs and library, an exclusive fun-filled campus with sports facilities, BE, B Pharma, M Pharma, MBA, MCA, MTech and PhD. Technocrats TIT Group, your perfect start to a successful career.
Request all guests and dignitaries, please have the seat on the dais. Life is a process of learning. It starts perhaps when we are not born and remain with us until such time when we shall meet our Maker. The zeal of learning cropped up when man was just a food gatherer and a cave dweller. And to maintain this legacy and zeal to see what could possibly happen in the universe in the next, in continuation of that, we are fortunate enough that today we have sessions with the rocket lady, the renowned astronaut Dr. Leslie Wickman. She will let us know the living and working in the space. Almost 20 years ago, a visionary man from Indian Administrative Service, Dr. R. Kasolia, who is having very simple lifestyle but very high thinking, laid the foundation of this Technocrats group. On that time, there were only 180 students and few faculty members were with him. Now, with the passage of time, Technocrats groups become largest technical institute of Central India. From its inceptions, Technocrat group believe all multidimensional development of the students. Beside giving quality technical educations to the budding engineers, the group has research center, publication house, cultural activities, sports and games, manufacturing units, construction units, etc., etc. Almost every year, we are receiving the best technical institutions and placement award from Government of Madhya Pradesh. Technocrats management team, we are having Chief Patron Dr. R. Kalsoria, sir. He himself is an IITian. Chairperson Mrs. Sadhana Kalsoria, Madam, is a philanthropist, entrepreneur and an able administrator. She is an ardent educationist with passions for quality and drive for excellence. It is her unyielding pursuit that the established Technocrats group of institutions as one of the largest and most reputed educational group of Central India. Subscribing to this above views more profoundly, today we will have sessions with Dr. Leslie Wickman, and we are fortunate enough that in these sessions we have amongst us our keynote speaker, Dr. Leslie Wickman, Mr. Brian Davis, Director, International Students at California Baptist University, then Ms. Kenasa Snow, Senior Vice President at Edling Training Service, Mr. Ashish Sarkar, Business Head at Edling Training Service, our Vice Chairman, shortly he will join the session. We have amongst us Dr. Anurag Chaubey, Director Admin of Technocrats Group, Dr. Bhupen Verma, Director TIT, then directors of different institutions of the group, faculty members and students. We are so happy that you all are here today, and once again a very warm welcome. As our tradition, may I request Dr. Anuprita Mishra, Madam, please welcome today's our main guest, Dr. Leslie Wickman. Now, Dr. Bhupen Verma, sir, Director TIT Bhopal, is requested to please welcome Mr. Brian Davis, Director California Baptist University. Dr. Anula Khare, Head of the Department Electrical Engineering, requested to please welcome Madam Kanesa Snow, Senior Vice President, Edling Training Service. Dr. K.K. Dividya, Director TIT Excellence, is requested to please welcome Mr. Ashish Sarkar, Business Head, Edling Training Service. Now, to start with, may I request Dr. Bhupen Verma, Director TIT Bhopal, for giving the opening remark.
Good afternoon, one and all present here. Dear student, are you thrilled? Yes, I am thrilled. I am very thrilled to welcome you all because we are sitting with an astronaut, would-be astronaut to Mangal Grah. I welcome Dr. William Wickman, Professor of Aerospace, Industrial and Mechanical Engineering at California Baptist University, and would be astronaut selected to travel space to the Mangal Grah in the forthcoming mission. I also welcome Mr. Brian Davis, Director International Students at California Baptist University, Ms. Kanesa Snow, Senior Vice President, Edling Training Services, Mr. Ashish Sarkar, Business Head, Edling Training Services, Dr. Anurag Chaubey, Group Director Administration TIT Group, Dr. C.M. Agal sir, colleague directors, all faculty members and dear students. Well, Technocrat Group is always a leader in providing all our students international exposure, and after performing excellently since its inception in 1999 with 180 students and reaching to a intake of 4,000 plus students recently last year and total student strength of 15,000, we are all set to move to the second version of TIT Technocrats Group, with becoming a global university in itself and providing all our students a truly international exposure. And in the recent past, we have at least 20 plus international experts, including Dr. Bernhard Gluck from Professor Technical University of Brandenburg, Germany, Dr. Wickman, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Startups from the Germany again, Dr. H. Glock, Professor of Civil Engineering, Professor Satyanarayan, University of Waterloo, Canada, Professor G. Ottersbach, expert of international IT risk management and a consultant to Atos India Limited and at international level to Dr. Alberto Freisler from the Switzerland, Dr. C.C. Ten from Malaysia, Dr. Sulan Zhao from China, and many more in this galaxy of international experts who have recently visited this campus for providing truly international exposure to our students. TIT Group has always keen to provide students with the exposure to the recent technologies to make them cope up with the international things, what is happening in the future and what is going to happen in the future and what is happening in the present. Although as far as space travel is concerned, it is not the subject of for Technocrat Institute of Technology, but I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Leslie Wickman to share her experiences and a plan to how to live in the space and what her learnings about her future travel in the space. As far as Indian citizen is concerned, I am truly proud of my Indian space research organizations with our various missions like Chandrayaan 1, Chandrayaan 2 and Mangalyaan mission. They are performing excellently and at the international level to become the leader in the space research organization and space research things, and we are truly proud of them, proud of ISRO as an Indian citizen. We also have a galaxy of international space travelers from India like Rakesh Sharma to be the pioneer. Then we have Ms. Kalpana Chawla from the Indian origin. We have Sunita Williams again from the Indian origin. Her parents was from India. So we have a galaxy of space travelers. But yes, we are again very much delighted to have Dr. Leslie Wickman here amongst us for providing her experiences. I want to inform the dais that TIT Group doesn't left any stone unturned to bring these recent exposures to our students, and we have also started with the We Will Succeed series where we had some very renowned, very successful experts, and we have given our students a chance to listen to them. And you are also not in the We Will Succeed series, but you are also very exceptional this chance to listen to one of the future astronaut to all our students. I welcome you all once again. Thank you so much.
May I now request Mr. Brian Davis, Director, International Students at California Baptist University, to say a few words. स्टूडेंट्स के लिए बस रुका हुआ है, जब तक प्रोग्राम फिनिश नहीं होता है बस नहीं जाएंगे यहाँ से.
Yes, we will make sure the bus stays for you. Sure. So thank you for welcoming us to TIT. I have myself been to Bhopal about 4 times, and this is my first time to your campus. So we are very honored and excited to be here with you today from CBU and to be able to bring Dr. Wickman alongside to share some of her expertise with you. At CBU, we have over 120 UG courses in about 10 different schools and colleges, including the College of Engineering, where Dr. Wickman herself works and teaches. We also have over 50 PG courses, and so we're very interested in further discussions with some of your faculty and staffs here about how we can maybe work together more as a school, and we would love also maybe to bring students here, or maybe for you to come to a visit in America, and maybe you could come to my house and we'll have dinner, okay? Oh, okay, maybe. Well, we're very excited to have a chance to have Dr. Wickman visit with you. So I'm going to not take too much of your time so you can hear from her. But thank you so much for letting us be here with you today.
Thank you, sir. Now the time has come for which we are waiting for. Today's speaker, Dr. Leslie Wickman, is an internationally respected research scientist, engineering consultant, author, and inspirational speaker. She was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. Her interest in space started at early age when her father would take her and her siblings outside on the clear, starry nights to look the moon, stars, and planets through the telescope. Dr. Wickman holds a master's degree in aeronautical and astronautical engineering and a doctoral degree in human factors and biomechanics, both from Stanford University. For more than a decade, Wickman was an engineer for Lockheed Martin Missiles and Space, where she worked on NASA, Hubble Space Telescope, and International Space Stations programs. Receiving commendations from NASA for her contributions and being designated as Lockheed's corporate astronaut, hence her nickname, Rocket Girl. Another noteworthy achievement is her role with web design and R&D and programming for Bellagio Fountains in Las Vegas. Dr. Wickman also worked as a research scientist on technical and policy aspects of national aerospace and defense issues. She has lectured around the world on satellite servicing, spaceflight, physiology, astronaut training and operations, as well as various topics in astronomy, environmental stewardship. Besides her research fields, Wickman is dedicated to athlete playing competitive beach volleyballs, as well as both indoor and beach volleyballs for athlete in actions in Bolivia, Brazil, and South Africa. She currently acts as a professor of aerospace, industrial, and mechanical engineering at California Baptist University, and also serving as executive director of American Scientific Affiliations. Some of her recent projects include climate change impacts on national security assessment of future human spaceflight missions and technologies, human factors problems for extreme environments, fighter pilot proficiency training, sustainable agriculture and water reclamations. She is also shortlisted candidate for Mars trip to NASA. It is my privilege to invite her, to invite the rocket lady, rocket scientist, and a renowned astronaut, Dr. Leslie Wickman, for her word of wisdom. Madam.
I believe we have a video that is going to be played that will give an introduction first.
How big the universe was. My name is Dr. Leslie Wickman. I'm a professor of aerospace, industrial, and mechanical engineering here at California Baptist University. As an undergraduate student, I studied at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. For grad school, I went to Stanford University, where I got my master's degree in aerospace engineering and my PhD in mechanical engineering, focusing on human factors and biomechanics. While I was at grad school, I did research at NASA Ames in Northern California on spacesuit design for Moon and Mars exploration missions. After grad school, I was working at Lockheed Martin on the International Space Station program, as well as Hubble Space Telescope programs. I served as the astronaut interface engineer and participated in lots of neutral buoyancy simulations in gigantic water tanks where we were simulating the tasks that the astronauts would be doing in space, developing tools for those missions and operational procedures. Along the way, I got a lot of astronaut training myself, including getting my scuba certification to participate in the neutral buoyancy tests, getting my pilot's license, getting spacesuit certified, and before long, Lockheed designated me as their corporate astronaut. Another exciting project that I got to work on was the Bellagio fountains out in Las Vegas, Nevada. I was in charge of research and development, as well as developing a simulation program that we ultimately used to program the choreography onto the fountains. One of the things that excites me about teaching here at California Baptist University is the opportunity for me to impart my knowledge and experience working in the aerospace industry with students who will be the ones to push the envelope of space exploration in the future.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me now? Okay, good. Thanks very much. It's my privilege and honor to be with you here today. Thank you so much for having us. If we can get the PowerPoint presentation started now, that would be great. So today I'm going to be talking about living and working in space and some of the challenges that astronauts and mission planners encounter when preparing for a space mission. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So today I'll be talking about what I've spent most of my aerospace career working on, which is human factors engineering for spaceflight. And human factors engineering is primarily concerned with keeping astronauts safe, healthy, and productive during their time in space. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in graduate school, as you heard in the video, I worked on spacesuit design at NASA Ames Research Center, which is located in Northern California. And the picture on the left-hand side of the screen, you see an aerial view of Moffett Field, where NASA Ames Research Center is located. It's at the south end of the San Francisco Bay, and the water that you can see at the top of the picture is actually the southern end of the San Francisco Bay, to give you an idea of where it's located. So the picture in the lower right corner is aboard the KC-135 research aircraft that NASA uses to simulate weightlessness. The plane flies parabolic trajectories, and so over the top of the parabola, you get about 20 seconds of weightlessness. So that we can do different sorts of simulations to see how easy or hard it might be for the astronauts to participate in various tasks. We also used the KC-135 for simulating lunar and Martian gravity, and those parabolas are slightly longer. The KC-135 is also affectionately known as the Vomit Comet. So think about that for a second. The reason that it's called the Vomit Comet is that people get motion sickness quite frequently when they're flying aboard it. So motion sickness any kind of motion sickness is related to each other. For example, you may have had car sickness or air sickness or seasickness. Can I see a show of hands if you've experienced any one of those forms of motion sickness? Nobody's been car sick or seasick or air sick. I want to see some hands in the air, because I have been. Am I the only one? Okay, there's a few hands going up. Okay, so this is similar to what happens to the astronauts in space. And so because of the fact that our bodies are used to existing in Earth's gravity level, and moving around in Earth gravity, we have a constant orienting factor in the gravity vector that goes constantly towards the center of the Earth. Okay, that gives us an orientation for local vertical and horizontal. And without that, when astronauts go into space, everything's different. You don't have the same frame of reference. So you have the vestibular canals in your inner ear that have fluid in them in 3 different axes, and as you move your head around, those canals circulate fluid across little hairs that send signals to your brain that help you to interpret your position in space. Okay? So we're used to that sensation oriented in gravity. Okay, you take away that gravity vector and it seems completely different. So astronauts get to space, they start moving their heads around and they get disoriented. So all motion sickness is about conflicting cues about your body's position in space. Okay, so your eyes are telling you one thing, your inner ear, semicircular canals are telling you something else. The forces that you feel on your body and in your joints is telling you something else. So there's a confusion of signals. This is the same thing, whether it's air sickness, seasickness, or road sickness, car sickness, is similar to spaceflight. And so your brain takes all these factors in, these cues that are given from different parts of your body, and interprets that, okay, they're not telling me the same thing. I must have been poisoned. I must have ingested some sort of a toxin. So that triggers the vomit response, because your body is simply trying to get rid of the poison that it thinks it's ingested. So that's what motion sickness is all about. Like I say, whether it's in space or here on Earth, your body is trying to get rid of the poison. And so this is actually a factor on the KC-135 as well as in spaceflight. So let's go to the next slide, please. As part of my doctoral work at Stanford, as I mentioned, I was involved in spacesuit design, and overlapping with that time, I worked at Lockheed Martin, and I worked on the Hubble Space Telescope program as well as the International Space Station program, and I was the astronaut interface engineer. I was responsible for training other astronauts, as well as making sure that the interfaces that astronauts would have to work with on the hardware on the space station as well as on the Hubble Space Telescope was accessible and had a good user interface and was user-friendly, so that the astronauts could do the jobs that they needed to do in space to make repairs as well as do assembly work. So along the way, because of the fact that I was involved in these various tasks in training other astronauts and doing simulation exercises, I got a lot of training myself along the way. And that consisted of a variety of different kinds of things. If we could go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. So I got my scuba certification so that I could participate in water tank simulations or neutral buoyancy facility simulations of long duration weightlessness tasks, because working in space is very similar to floating in a water tank, right? Your body is made up mostly of water, and so it has the same density, therefore a similar buoyancy to what water has. And so you feel like you're weightless in a water tank. So in addition to getting scuba certified, I got my pilot's license. I was flying aboard the KC-135. I did parachute training, jumping out of planes, high altitude physiology training in hypobaric chambers where they reduce the atmospheric pressure and allow you to experience what your personal symptoms of hypoxia would be. Now, hypoxia is low oxygen to the brain, okay? So if you have low oxygen to your brain is not functioning properly, and eventually you'll pass out. And so the reason for the hypobaric training in a high-altitude physiology chamber is to experience your own symptoms so that you can recognize those symptoms early enough to be able to take corrective action and do something to save your life before you pass out in space and it's too late. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. And so many of these photos are from various aspects of training or simulations that we did. Let's go to the next slide, please. I also spend a fair amount of time, and have over the course of my career, working at federal think tanks in the United States, such as the RAND Corporation and the Aerospace Corporation. We worked on NASA and Air Force studies, including NASA's Crew Exploration Vehicle, which has manifested itself now in the SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicle that you may have heard about, which is an Elon Musk design that it has just recently gone to the space station and will be capable of carrying crew members to and from the space station. I also worked on NASA's Mars exploration rovers, and I've done work on lunar and Mars mission planning for human missions to both of those celestial bodies. Let's go to the next slide, please. So some of the specific topics that are important in keeping astronauts safe, healthy, and productive while they're in space include space physiology. So the special conditions of spaceflight, such as reduced gravity, higher radiation exposure, the vacuum of space, and wide temperature variations have various physiological effects on the astronauts in space. And being in space for long periods of time seems to affect human physiology in ways that are similar to extended periods of inactivity here on Earth. In fact, one of the ways that researchers investigate the problems of spaceflight is through what we call bed rest studies, where they'll have a number of experimental test subjects that are confined to bed rest for long periods of time, and they see what happens to people's bodies during that time. So some of the things that happen are cardiovascular deconditioning. Your heart doesn't have to work as hard when you're lying in bed. Your muscles don't have to work as hard, so there's muscular atrophy. There's also skeletal system degradation and bone mineral loss. And these are some of the things that I'll talk a little bit more about in the slides that follow. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so there are various effects that happen, and the onset of these effects are different. So effects that are immediate, that occur within minutes to hours of arrival in reduced gravity, are, first of all, a height increase. So what happens in zero gravity, remember you're floating, so your spine decompresses and stretches out. And this can lead to a height increase of 1 or 2 inches. And along with that height increase, you have an abdominal girth decrease. So people get taller and thinner. Now, in the United States, a lot of people would actually like to be taller and thinner. I don't know about how it is here in India, but it's actually one of the things that appeals to people. So we also have an internal organ shift in the abdominal cavity of the body. And the posture is altered. And if those of you, I don't know if you have enough room to stand up where you're sitting, but I'd like you to stand up with me if you're able to. And I'm going to demonstrate the altered posture of spaceflight. Okay? So are you willing to stand up with me? Thank you. So imagine, if you will, the best way to get an idea of what the neutral body position is to imagine yourself floating in a water tank with a life preserver on. Okay? So imagine you're in a water tank and you've got a life preserver on, so you don't need to swim, you don't need to tread water. So essentially what happens is this. I'm going to step away from the mic. Watch this. And I'd like you to do it with me if you can. Okay? I don't see too many of you participating. I'd like to get more audience participation in this. So what happens is your arms float up to about shoulder level, and your legs bend at the knee and the hip. And you just feel, again, like you're floating. So let's try that one more time, okay? Very good. Give yourselves a hand. You guys are all astronauts in training now. Very good. Good job. So the next thing I'd like to talk about that happens very quickly once you reach space is because the gravity vector is not pulling down on your body, it's not pulling down on the fluids in the blood in your body. And because of that, there's an upward fluid shift in your body. So your blood, the water in your body, all shifts upward towards your head and your chest. Okay? And this results in a very stuffy or puffy feeling in your face. And if you've ever had a really bad cold, you may have experienced this kind of congestion. And it feels like your face swells up, and it's hard to breathe a little bit. And because of that, it's hard to smell things very well. And you probably know that your sense of smell and your sense of taste are very closely related. And so food doesn't taste as good. Okay? And as this blood and other fluid pools around your heart has within it what are known as baroreceptors or pressure receptors in your heart. And those sensors perceive an increased blood pressure in your body. Now you know high blood pressure is not a good thing, right? And so because of that, your body's very smart. It does a lot of things automatically in response to its environment to make a better situation for you. So what happens with these baroreceptors sensing a high blood pressure, it triggers a diuretic response. And so what that means is you start urinating more than normal. Okay? And that means you're getting rid of what your body perceives to be excess fluid. And so then from then on, you're actually slightly dehydrated for the rest of your time in space. And so the astronauts have to force themselves to drink extra water to combat that dehydration, because that's not good for your body either. So let's go to the next slide, please. So some more of the intermediate effects that have come on within hours to days of being in space is associated with this headward body shift. We have this fluid loss, which I talked about a bit, and that's across both your both your water volume as well as your blood volume. And this also leads to a decrease in your leg volume, because as the fluids shift away from your lower body, the volume in your legs shrinks because there's less fluid to fill them out. You also have vestibular system effects, which I mentioned earlier. So without gravity, your motion is perceived differently. And so again, this leads to this space motion sickness, but it also leads to a difference in perceiving where your body parts are and your joints and your limbs. And so that can lead to a lack of coordination. So you can feel kind of clumsy in space while you're getting used to sensing your body's position without the gravity vector. Let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, whoop. Okay, I think we're one ahead of where we need to be. There should be another one in there. Just go back one, please. Can you go back one slide? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Effects occurring within days to weeks. As I mentioned, the blood plasma loss. You also have muscular atrophy, which I referred to briefly before. And then we also have the cardiovascular deconditioning, because the heart is working not as hard to pump blood from your lower body to your upper body where it's pooled already. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide then. So effects that occur within weeks to months include progressive bone loss, And this occurs particularly in the legs, the pelvic girdle, and the spine. This is similar to what's seen in disuse osteoporosis. We see it in bed rest patients. We see it in elderly people. So perhaps you know someone in your family, a grandmother, grandfather, or elderly relative who has osteoporosis. Does anybody have a relative that might have osteoporosis? So osteoporosis is weak bones, low bone density, and susceptibility to fracture. Okay, and so this happens in spaceflight. And if a person were to go to space and stay in space the rest of their lives, it might not be a problem because the forces that you're experiencing in space are much lower than what you experience here on Earth. But because people generally tend to plan to come back to Earth, it can be a problem when they come back. And also for planning for a Mars mission where we're in zero gravity during transit to Mars, but then once we land on Mars, we need to do some work and tasks and move around and perhaps build a base, then we have to worry about bone strength. So this is super important. And in fact, your body has all these very interesting mechanisms to help maintain itself in the most efficient way possible. And so your bones are constantly remodeling themselves according to the mechanical stresses that they experience. And you actually see this in athletes. So studies have been done on the dominant hand or dominant arm of tennis players and other sport athletes. And they see that the dominant arm of a player that plays tennis or other sports is actually denser bone than the non-dominant arm. And so what happens in spaceflight and here on Earth is that we have these kinds of cells in the bone called osteoclasts that tunnel through the bone like little Pac-Man. You guys remember the video game Pac-Man? These bone cells are like tiny little Pac-Man that tunnel through the bone, taking away bone, and then there's another type of cell that follows behind them called osteoblasts that lays down new bone behind them. And that whole process is governed by the amount of mechanical stress that is applied to the bones. If your bones aren't sensing much exercise or stress on them, then they're going to remodel themselves more weakly, brittly, less densely than if you're applying a lot of force to them and getting a lot of exercise. So this is a big issue in spaceflight because people end up losing a great deal of bone mass when they're flying in space. Another thing that happens along with the bone loss is because bones are made of calcium and other minerals, you have a lot of minerals floating around in your bodies, in your bloodstream, in your urine, and various other fluids. And this can lead to kidney stones. Now, if you ever have known anyone in your life who's experienced kidney stones, you know it's a very painful process, right? Can you imagine having a case of kidney stones in space where you're not close to a medical center to get them treated, or where you're not even close to a comfortable bed that you can sleep in and relax, right? It would be really a painful experience in space. Another thing that happens in spaceflight is excessive exposure to radiation. So here on Earth, we are very protected from space radiation by our atmosphere as well as by the magnetic field of the Earth. In space, where the International Space Station flies, those astronauts are exposed to a level of radiation 100 times greater than we are here on the surface of the planet. So that's an immense amount of radiation exposure, and that can have all kinds of different effects. Let's go to the next slide, please. So these are some of the effects that occur within weeks to months of being in space. And one of those that's associated with radiation exposure is a suppression of your immune system, which can leave you susceptible not just to the factors of radiation exposure, but to other illnesses. If your immune system is not strong, then you can be susceptible to catching diseases from other people, from bacteria that's growing in the space station. All kinds of things can be problematic. And also, just the simple effect of increased radiation exposure can lead to all kinds of problems. You can have cell mutation, cell death, cell modification. You can also have more extreme effects that lead to cancer that can develop later over your lifetime because of the cells that get mutated in that high radiation environment. And the case gets even worse when you leave the protection of Earth's magnetic field. Once you leave Earth orbit and travel to Mars, for example, the radiation exposure gets even higher and more detrimental to your health. Let's go to the next slide, please. So there are a variety of physiological countermeasures that have been tried over the years. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the actual research that's done to determine methods of supporting astronaut health is done on the Earth in bed rest studies, or it's done on the space station with small animals into centrifuges or in zero gravity, where they can test these different effects on animals. But for the purposes of keeping the astronauts safe and healthy while they're in orbit so that they can be productive, they have taken the approach, by and large, of not doing controlled studies on the astronauts. Instead, what they've said is, we know that exercise has a positive effect. We know that certain body loading devices has a positive effect. We know that certain drug agents and hormones can have a positive effect. And we know that for animals, artificial gravity can have a positive effect. We have not been able to implement a large enough centrifuge to produce artificial gravity that could be useful for humans in space, simply because the cost of constructing such a large centrifuge would be cost prohibitive. So the approach again has been to say, okay, we know that all of these things have some positive effect on astronaut health. We're just going to use all of them. Instead of saying, oh, let's try this and see how much of an effect it has, we basically throw everything that we have at the problem and hope that it goes away. So researchers have estimated, though, that in order to maintain the physiological conditioning, the heart health, the bone health, the muscular health of an astronaut when they left Earth, that they would have to exercise vigorously every day in space for about 4 hours per day. Now, can you imagine being motivated to exercise for 4 hours every day? Let alone here on Earth. Most people wouldn't have that motivation to do that much exercise here on Earth, let alone in space, where you have a very busy schedule. You know, they typically have more work than they can possibly do in a day anyway, without even trying to exercise. So the average of an astronaut in space is about 1 hour per day of exercise. And even at that, after a few months or even a year in space, they come back to Earth and they are so physiologically compromised that they can't even get out of the spacecraft on their own power, and they have to be lifted and carried. So there are lots of problems with space flight that we have to do some serious work on before we embark on a very long duration flight to Mars that would last for a very long time, and certainly before establishing a long-term base on Mars. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So these problems, again, as I mentioned, if an astronaut were to go to space and plan to stay there in zero gravity for the rest of their lives, these problems wouldn't be so bad, because you'd adapt to the zero-G environment and you wouldn't be encountering large stresses because of the fact you're floating around in zero-G most of the time. But again, most people want to come back home at some point. Or eventually they're going to go to a Mars base, perhaps, where we have gravity. So these problems kind of are the opposite when we come back to the Earth or back to a gravity field. So for example, the fluid shifts back from the upper body, where it pooled around the heart, to the lower body. In gravity, when we try to stand up for the very first time, remember that we've lost a lot of blood volume as well as other fluid volume. And so the first thing that happens, because your heart is no longer used to pumping the blood up to the upper body against gravity, and there's not as much blood available, you stand up and you faint because the blood all goes to your feet. And there's no blood to your brain, so you pass out. This is known as orthostatic intolerance. You can't stand to be upright, in simple terms. Okay? This can also lead, because of the volume loss and because of some of the blood loss that involves red blood cell loss, this can lead to anemia that persists for a while after return to Earth. And there's also a loss of coordination. Remember, people had to get used to moving around in a zero-gravity environment, and they were kind of clumsy and uncoordinated initially when they got to space. The same is true for readapting to an Earth environment where you have gravity and you have the downward gravity vector acting on you all the time. So there's going to be a period of readaptation, and in effect, it's kind of like you have to learn to walk all over again. Okay? And then again, there's muscle and bone atrophy. We have to readapt to the 1G environment. We have to build up our muscle strength. We have to build up our bone density. We can't just immediately go from returning to Earth and get back into our normal exercise or sports routines, because that might cause muscle or bone injury, right? We might have fractures, we might have pulled muscles, torn muscles. So we have to do all of this gradually. And same thing with the cardiovascular reconditioning. It takes some time to, if you're training for, let's say you're training for a marathon here on Earth, you can't just go out and run a full marathon without training for it, right? So the same thing when you come back to Earth from space, you have to build up to it gradually. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about the physiological problems with spaceflight, but there are also psychological and sociological problems in spaceflight. And two of the main factors that lead to most of these other problems in spaceflight, as far as the psychology or the sociology and the interaction with the other crew members are involved, come down to two factors. One is isolation from your family, your friends, your culture, your local environment, the things that you're used to. So that factor is isolation. The second factor is confinement. So you're isolated from what you know, and you're confined in a small vehicle with a bunch of strangers. Okay? So it can be, typically a space mission would involve at least one other crew member for a crew of 2, on up to maybe 6 crew members total. So you're going to be living in a small confined space with 1 to 5 other people. And you may know in your groups that you work with in school, often my students work in teams to get projects done. And certain personality characteristics can irritate certain people, right? We don't always get along with everyone really well, right? So if you're confined to a small space with people that you may or may not like, there can be some problems. And again, you know, we have people on the space station that have been in space for a little over a year. But when we start talking about a longer duration mission, the mission that I was approached about is called the flyby mission to Mars, which essentially involves leaving Earth, flying out to Mars, and going past it and returning back to Earth. Okay? There's no landing on the surface, but even that mission would be 500 days long. That's a lot longer than 1 year. We don't have any experience with that duration of spaceflight. If we land on Mars and stay for a few months and then come home, the minimum round trip for that kind of a mission is 3 years. Okay? So again, we don't have experience with that long of duration of spaceflight. So we can have all kinds of problems that would crop up in an individual or in a full crew, interpersonal problems that could happen. So, and it's very hard to know ahead of time, unless you've had that crew, that exact crew working and living together for a long duration themselves, even on Earth, what's going to happen and who's going to be better at long duration spaceflight without cracking psychologically. Okay? So these are some of the issues. It's hard to select for that. It's hard to know in advance who's going to do well and who is not. So let's go to the next slide, please. So some of the psychological countermeasures that have been proposed for preventing psychological problems are designing the vehicle in a way that reminds people of home, a way that is comfortable, and a way that seems to have kind of a local vertical so that you have a sense of up and down. But this actually runs at cross purposes with the efficiency of a zero gravity environment. One of the nice things about a zero gravity environment is that you don't have to have all of your workstations aligned vertically with an up or a down. And so if you insist on doing that, then you're actually losing some of the efficiencies of a zero gravity environment. I know that we're running out of time, so I'm going to try to move ahead a little bit more quickly. Some of the other factors that are important are personal hygiene and health we've talked about, but personal hygiene is exceptionally important. If you can imagine being cooped up in a small space with people who don't take showers regularly, people are going to start to stink. And if you're not already irritated with a person's personality, you may be irritated by their body odor. So these are some of the very real things that we have to think about in planning for spaceflight. Let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the clothing issues. So clothing is something that you might not think about, but typically space clothing is designed to be layered. If you live with roommates or other family members, you know that some people run hot and some people run cold temperature-wise. The clothing is designed so that those who run cold can put on more layers, or those that run hot can take off a layer. But they're not going to be able, you're not going to have the thermostat adjusted to everyone's ideal temperature. We also make use of a lot of Velcro, because just as people float in space, so do items that you're working with. So whether the Velcro is on your clothing or on a wall somewhere, you need to be able to stick something to a place that you know you can find it again later. So maybe you have a checklist or a notepad that has notes. You stick it to a wall or you stick it to your pant leg with Velcro. It's very, very handy. So one of the final things I wanted, let's go to the next slide, please. One of the things I want to just emphasize in terms of planning for spaceflight missions with humans is that crew safety always has to be the top priority. We have a thing we call Murphy's Law, maybe you know it. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So we have to always have backup plans for how to get jobs done. If the first way fails, then we have to have another way to get it done. And that's what it talks about at the bottom of this list, backup plans and procedures. The final thing that I want to talk about now is a program that we're involved with at Cal Baptist University with our students who are in our aerospace club. It's part of a large network of clubs around the world called Students for Exploration and Development of Space. It's SEDS for short. And our students have been working on high-altitude balloon launches. So last May we had our very first high-altitude balloon launch. We launched a payload that had a GoPro camera as well as a GPS tracking device and a set of hand warmers inside it to keep everything warm at the high altitude that we launched to. This shows some pictures of pre-launch preparation in the desert outside of Riverside where our university is. And the next slide, please, shows our students filling the high-altitude balloon with helium just as the sun is coming up, getting ready to launch the payload. So shortly after this photograph was taken, we let go of the balloon and watched it rise. And it went all the way up to 80,000 feet. And let's go to the next slide, please. An hour and a half later, using the GPS tracking device, we drove 20 miles through the desert in California, and it landed about an hour and a half later after reaching 80,000 foot altitude, tracking it down and recovering the payload. The lower right-hand corner, you see us holding the payload with the GoPro camera. And if we could go to the next slide, please. This is one of the photographs that was taken from the high altitude that it reached, and you can actually see the thin blue line of the Earth's atmosphere against the blackness of space on Earth's horizon. And so we had a great success with this balloon project, and the next step our students are taking as we speak, actually go back to the previous slide, please. The next step that we'll be taking is to develop a payload that includes a communication package that will allow us to transmit real-time data from the payload back to Earth. And there are a number of different applications for this sort of balloon that carries a camera to high altitude for different applications on Earth, whether it's providing air-based support for military operations or shipping operations or any of a variety of sorts of things. And it's also, the payload size is one that we could use on a CubeSat. So with that, I'd like to wrap up, and I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your attention.
If you want to ask any questions, she will give the answer, or if you have unique queries, she may settle your queries. Would you like to ask any questions, students?
No, we are the bus. We have to get the bus.
Thank you, ma'am, for your very informative speech.
Thank you so much.
We are almost sure we'll have another sessions when we will return back from the march. Now, to make this moment much memorable and as a token of our respect, may I now request Dr. Anurag Chaube, Director Administration, please present a memento to Dr. Leslie Wickman. Now, at last but not the least, to sum up and conclude this session, may I now request Dr. Anuprita Mishra, HOD Electrical Engineering, please propose the vote of thanks.
Very good evening to each and everyone present over here. Respected Dr. Leslie Wickman, Professor of Aerospace, Industrial and Mechanical Engineering at California Baptist University, Mr. Brian Davey, Ms. Kanesa Snow, Mr. Ashish Sarkar, respectable Dr. Anurag Chaube, respected distinguished directors of different institutes of TIT Group, HODs, faculty members, and my dear students. On behalf of TIT Group of Institutions, let me have the privilege of extending a warm thanks to all present here. First of all, I would like to take opportunity to give a wholeheartedly thanks to our most valued invited guest, respected Dr. Leslie Wickman, research scientist, Professor of Aerospace, Industrial, Mechanical Engineering, made us feel very proud by interacting with our students. And I would also like to thank Mr. Brian Davey, Director of International Students at California Baptist University, who managed visit to TIT Group Bhopal. Also thanks to Ms. Kanesa Snow, Senior Vice President at EdLink Training Service, and Mr. Ashish Sarkar, Business Head at EdLink Training Services. Both made it possible today's visit of Dr. Wickman by keeping faith in TIT Group. I would like to thank Dr. Bhupen Verma sir, Director TIT, for the perfect logistic support and guidance he has extended. I extend vote of thanks to Director Administration Dr. Anurag Chaubey, all the directors of the group, faculty members. Thanks to ML Chokse and his team. I would like to thank dear students for patient hearing. Finally, I would like to thank each and everyone who was directly and indirectly involved in organizing this event. We thank you for being with us this evening. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you. God bless you.
Yeah, we are going to distribute signed autograph. People should be. We will distribute some pamphlets and a signed photograph. Photograph after. We can sign photograph of anyone who wants to meet us to understand about study abroad.
Technocrats TIT Group of Institutions, the largest educational group of Central India, awarded for excellence in education and highest placements, delivering quality education with world-class infrastructure, highly qualified faculties, high-tech labs and library, an exclusive fun-filled campus with sports facilities, BE, B Pharma, M Pharma, MBA, MCA, MTech and PhD. Technocrats TIT Group, your perfect start to a successful career.